Hello, and thank you for joining us for a pre concert conversation about the upcoming concert by the Maryland Symphony Orchestra and our marvelous guest artist, Martha Guth. It's a program that we've entitled Mozart and Mahler, and it's not only Mozart and Mahler, but also the wonderful composer Reynaldo Hahn, who joins us in an overture he wrote for an operetta called Mozart. And I don't think I can talk about this program without bringing Martha Guth in immediately, because Reynaldo Hahn was a singer and is well known for the songs that he wrote, the art songs that he wrote. He wrote operas, he wrote works for orchestra and chamber works, concertos, but we know him mostly as a songwriter. And to understand him and his place in the history of music, it's important to consider him in this way, especially because it affects the kind of music he wrote. So please welcome now Martha Guth. Martha, you and I were supposed to perform this concert minus the Reynaldo Hahn. We were going to do a cobbled together Mozart symphony in the way that Mozart would have cobbled together a symphony. As an opener, but I changed my mind about it because I wanted to have a different perspective in this concert with two, not musical rivals, but two contemporaries, sort of framing Mozart in the center, the 16-year-old Mozart who was already halfway through his life. You and I were supposed to perform this concert 2 years ago, almost exactly to the weekend, and COVID intervened, and we were just talking before this filming that you were actually on your way out to come down to Maryland when we called you and said that we had to cancel the concert or postpone it for COVID reasons. And now here we are, 2 years later, about to do it. So much has happened, I'm sure, to you in the intervening years, but thank God the music still stays. So I'm excited to have you with us. Reynaldo Hahn, we're going to do an overture to an operetta or a kind of, I don't know if it was a kind of a musical or a Singspiel kind of thing that he wrote as a vehicle for the great French singer Yvonne Printemps and her husband, the actor and comedian Sacha Guitry. I think that's how you pronounce his name. And it was highly popular. It tells the story of a 20-year-old Mozart returning to Paris to find his way, make his way through the gals as well. He's quite a flirt in this play. It's a pants role, so Yvonne gets to flirt with the gals, pretending she's Mozart. And it's kind of a comedy, but it also uses the music of Mozart in a very special way. I don't know if you know any of the arias or songs from this operetta at all. The opening, the overture, is absolutely high-spirited and full of beautiful melody, as Mozart's music would have been. But it doesn't necessarily sound like Mozart. It definitely sounds like Reynaldo Hahn, and there's even a moment where you feel like you've gone down to his native Venezuela. For just a moment, there's a little South American Latin touch to the way he works his melodies. Can you tell us about Reynaldo Hahn? First of all, welcome, and I'm so excited to be working with you again. You and I performed the Mahler together in Flagstaff, I think in like 2015 or 14 or something like that. And I had never forgotten how wonderful you were and how wonderful it was to work with you, and couldn't wait to bring you to Maryland. Finally, it's happened. A couple years too late, but finally it's happened. And so welcome, and how are you doing?
Thank you. Thank you for having me. And thank you for having me back. I think, too, it's really been a privilege to work with organizations such as the Maryland Symphony Orchestra, because you've worked so hard to maintain these relationships with the artists that you work with. I think that not That's not been the case all of the time. In the past couple of years, I think it's been tricky for many artists and many organizations. So I would say that first and foremost, I'm really grateful to be coming 2 years later after the fact. But I'm doing wonderfully. There is, yeah, things are picking up, certainly. And I've also been extremely lucky because I have a faculty position at the Ithaca College in their music department. So
One of
that's,
the storied departments in our country, by the way, I have to
yeah,
say.
yeah.
Yeah, it's definitely a destination point for young musicians who are looking to go on as professionals. So fantastic. They're lucky to have you.
Well, I feel lucky to be engaging with these young musicians who are so passionate and forward-thinking and interesting. So that's really been a joy. Even teaching over Zoom has been a joy. But yeah, you asked about Ronaldo Hahn. I don't know a huge amount about his operetta because his songs are so prevalent in the vocal world. I think that's really what he's known for. But what I do know that carries between both is his unbelievable gift for melody.
Hmm.
And just this, I would say he has a knack for surprising you with the sweetness of
Hmm.
his sounds. Um, and I uh, not only is his music enticing, I think, for young musicians to learn, but it absolutely is such a wonderful choice for the opener of a concert, because what I think it does is it allows an audience to settle in and just
Yes.
completely feel embraced by the music, which is, I think, exactly what we need right now.
Yes, absolutely. And I felt that when I chose it, that it was just inviting, it was delightful, it is embracing, and it is pleasing, as opposed to any kind of confrontation. It's like, we're going to have fun. We're going to have a great evening. You're just going to have a great time. And I don't know whether you go on YouTube and hear all the voices of the past, these old gramophone people are uploading just everything to YouTube, and including some of the recordings that Ronaldo Hahn made himself of his singing his own songs. He had a very sweet voice himself,
Yeah.
very lovely, and I guess he was known to be a singer. He, of course, accompanied some of the great singers of his time. And we're talking about the same time that Mahler lived. He was a direct colleague, and he lived at the exact same time and was performing in similar venues. And although they had different spheres, Ronaldo Hahn was in Paris, and of course, Mahler was mostly in Vienna at
Mhm.
this point, at the turn of the century or so. This is from 1924, though, so this is after Mahler's gone, and it's a different time in the world. It's after the First World War, so it has a different kind of feel to it, of course.
Yeah,
But
I've gone onto YouTube to hear, especially Yvonne Printemps, because it's really interesting. I think she was known mostly as an actor, but she sang a lot of the songs of Poulenc,
mhm.
um, and certainly Hahn. And so she was known for her expressivity and just absolute, yeah, for the way that she was able to deliver the text. And I think that speaks a lot to her skill as both as an actor and as a musician.
And the importance of the text. I mean, the importance, I mean, so we talk so much about the beautiful melodies and things, but I am always reminded that, of course, if you're a great composer, then you're thinking about how does the music reflect and enhance and support the text. And so that's something that we'll discuss about Mozart and also Mahler in just a moment. Just a few more seconds on Rinaldo Hahn, because I believe that he is sort of coming into his own now. We recognize him as not only a great songwriter, but as a skilled orchestrator. And he was super important as a performer and musician, as a conductor. He died, unfortunately, right at the end of the Second World War, I believe, of complications of injuries sustained in an explosion, I think, toward the end of the war. But he was a marvelous conductor of opera. And what was interesting when people talked about him as an opera conductor was that he specialized in Mozart. And they were always thrilled that he did the recitatives and other things exactly as Mozart had written them on the page, which is going to be a contrast from the way that Mahler felt absolutely welcome to reorchestrate and change. And he was known very much for sort of distorting especially in the Beethoven symphonies, where he would make these mammoth orchestras play Beethoven and double the winds and add notes and bring in percussion and other things like that to sort of enhance Beethoven in a Mahlerian way, whereas Ronaldo Hahn is going the other direction and believing that Mozart knew exactly what he wanted and trying to get back to the original text. So these two things that are going to go throughout the 20th century, for all of us as performers, we have to make certain decisions about how do we interpret music of the past. And it's so interesting to see even these two contemporaries taking absolutely different directions in their understanding and treatment of music of the past. I thought that was fascinating to learn about Ronaldo Hahn. And so I thought it was even more fitting that we did the overture to his operetta Mozart. Evidently, it was a kind of pastiche where he would weave in themes of Mozart into music of his own in order to forward the drama, and people found that quite something. But when it came to actually performing Mozart in its entirety as an opera, he would be quite what we would call a traditionalist at this point. But actually, at that point, he was rather radical in going back to the text and honoring it as it was. So fascinating.
It
And
is
these things
fascinating.
still come up. I wonder, as a singer, I mean, now we're going to go into the Mozart Exultate Jubilate. This is a 1770s, Mozart's 16, and he is totally impressed with this castrato singer who is premiering I think his first opera, well, one of his first operas, Lucio Silla, maybe, is that how it,
Right.
and in Milano, and he's overwhelmed by the ability of this man to sing the soprano role, and this is a dying form, thank God, for anatomy's sake. But in those days, still castrati were singing the soprano roles, and he wrote the Exultate Jubilate for this man to sing in church, or I believe in a sacred setting of some sort.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, Lucio Silla is known for its I mean, the passages of coloratura are absolutely insane. They are, I mean, I really, it's the most Florida thing I have ever seen, with no place to take breaths, all sorts. I mean, it's really just uh, almost every single role in that show is crazy. So I found it really interesting that this was written around the same time, because in some ways the Exultate Jubilate is a little simpler, and it seems like it comes from, at least in my reading of it, of a slightly more mature sensibility of writing for the voice. Lucio Silla is just, I don't even know how those singers probably were able to get through it. I actually covered one of those roles at the Santa Fe Opera earlier in my career, and it was just yeah, it was a party all the time.
Well, I'm wondering if it's because of his youth and in
Yes.
experience. I mean, in two of the past premieres that I've done in the past 2 months, I've done two world premieres by extraordinary composers who wrote extraordinarily difficult music for the orchestra to play. And I'm wondering if it's partly the fact that it's written in a vacuum and not heard. Uh, and until it's heard, and I'll tell you, the composers took out all kinds of things in
Mhm.
this recent experience. Just were all the way up to dress rehearsal, changing things and cleaning out textures and removing entire sections, or asking everyone to just play piano in order for balance with the soloist and other things. And I'm wondering if that's the case with little Mozart. He's not so little, I guess, at 16, but he heard what happened in Lucio Silla, and then his next writing for this great singer, who probably had a hand in the actual composition. They think that maybe he even wrote the words. Who knows? Is it Ceccarelli or Cacciarelli? I don't remember how he's pronounced, the castrato. But at any rate, maybe this is written simpler just because of the experience he was having with Lucio Silla, hearing that it was hard. And maybe people were telling him, kid, this is hard. We're going to do it, but this is hard. I
Well,
don't know. I
it
mean,
could
I don't, most Italians, they don't have any problem telling composers. Are you
exactly.
kidding me?
Yeah, I mean, it could really be. I mean, I guess, we don't know, but what I look at there is just almost the distillation of a voice, where we get into this exactly what we expect from Mozart. Beautiful lyrical lines, yes, some gorgeous coloratura moments. So that, of course, there are places to show off. But it is almost as if, in comparison, these two pieces, like the first one is somebody trying to show off every single device that they have at their fingertips all at the same time, and then sort of having that kind of funneled into this really perfect
Yeah, it
piece
is
of,
beautiful.
yeah, yeah.
Also, it is a sacred work, so maybe such floridity and sensationalism, shall we say, isn't allowed in church in the
Possibly,
same way.
although, I mean, certainly, his C minor mass, there are a number of places that are very, very florid and very tricky
Yes.
in that way. But yeah, yeah.
I don't know. I mean, it seems to that he was writing of the time and in a manner in which, well, they called it a motet, but it's more like a cantata. The form is two arias, a recitative, and an alleluia at the end, and that was sort of a standard, I guess. And this is the only one in this form that he wrote, however, and it had to be specifically for the singer
Mhm.
in mind, at least, and for a specific moment, although he took the piece and another castrato sang it, I think, in Salzburg, and I think there's maybe three versions in terms of text, at least. I wanted to warn you that we are using the Salzburg, not text, but because I like the original text better than the Salzburg text, which was specific for a specific Sunday and celebrating the Holy Trinity. This is a different Sunday. It We're using two flutes. I just like the idea of the two flutes with it. I think it's a nice idea. It's possible that in Salzburg the oboists weren't as good as the ones in Milano, or whatever, or maybe he thought the flutes would match the singer a little bit more. But I like the overtone of the flute in this case. I hope you don't mind. I
Right.
figure he wrote it for each, and we have it, and let's do it a little different than with the oboes. But we will use the text, the original text, which I think is an interesting one. I think it fits in with the Mahler a little bit more.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, with the singing, calling the heavenly singing, and at the end of the Mahler, there's this idea, this young child telling the listener, whoever it is, the encounter is about. The music is it. Fills the senses in a way that you can't even possibly imagine.
Yeah.
And in some ways, the Exultate is calling on the heavens and the earth to sing together. And I just thought that it kind of matches and complements.
It's, I mean,
And it's also a young Mozart. And the Ronaldo Hahn, I wanted to say that at one point I was going to ask you to learn yet another piece, and I thought, she can't really sing the whole concert. She won't have anything left for Mahler, which already is so demanding in a very specific way. But there is a moment in Ronaldo Hahn's Mozart operetta where the older Mozart, the 20-year-old, is talking to his young self, the child Mozart who came to Paris first with his father and sister and sat on the lap of Marie Antoinette and played harpsichord as a tiny little wee one. And you have the 20-year-old talking to his younger self. And I just think that it's I was going to ask you to do that aria just because it's so cool, and then we would do the young Mozart, the 16-year-old, the precociousness of and the ambition of a youngster, and then of course the Mahler, which is all reflecting in a way on this childlike naivete look at heaven, at paradise. So I just thought that would fit perfectly. And then I thought, well, it's a little bit too much. But it's good to know that it's in there. And maybe someone else will do that in the programming sometime. Mozart, singing Mozart, you were saying the beautiful passages. Does it lie easily? Is it something that you have to work hard at? Is there do you take a different stylistic approach, a technical approach to singing Mozart
um,
than to other things?
yeah, I mean, Mozart is always a great teacher, I find. Singing his music, to be able to sing it well, you have to have a fairly solid technique, or else it's just too tricky. I find, it's really hard to kind of like scoot on by
Yeah.
without really having worked foundationally. But I find that within Mozart, and I think really this goes for Schubert too, actually. In some ways, you can listen to it and think, oh man, I have to sort of sing within the confines, this sort of a little bit more strict form. But I have found that as I have aged and really um, lived and sat with Mozart now for a few decades, that I find his music to be incredibly flexible, and that there is so much more scope for imagination because of the way that he treats the text and the repetition. That I think that I just I just find that it's an endless pool of imagination that he's drawing from. This piece in particular, of course, has some very tricky sections. There's some very tricky sections of coloratura where if you're not lined up properly can go haywire. But I think that I mean, I suppose that's the case for many pieces. Um, do I come at it from a different stylistic point of view? The voice teacher in me is going to say almost not, but I also think that this genius pairing of Mahler 4 and this particular piece, they actually speak on very similar levels. They both ask of the soprano to be very nimble, to be kind of to yes, sing with their whole voice, but really in this childlike, um, joyful, and absolutely, I don't even know. It's overwhelming. It's overwhelming joy. And in some ways, at this moment in this time, at least where we are in this country, when coming out from a pandemic, I find it extremely welcome.
Yes.
Yeah.
Oh my goodness, yes. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's for us, it's so wonderful to be able to take up where we left off. This is literally the concert. We had one rehearsal.
Yeah.
and you were on your way down to rehearse with us, where we left off at COVID for the pandemic, and now we're taking up again. We're meeting again, and it looks like we're going to have, let's hope, a resumption of what. It's a new normal, but it will be back to something where we can see each other's faces and
Ah,
smiles and things like that. I forget how wonderful it is to see other people's smiles, and you forget what people look like after a while.
right,
So we're getting there. We're not quite there, but we're getting there, and
right.
that's hopeful. But I agree with you in terms of the programming and the reason I asked about that, in not in terms of your technique as a singer. I mean, you have to have a solid technique, and that should set you up for any style or any period of time or anything. It's just that in the 20th century, and even into the 21st century, there has been a placement of importance of on being authentic, on looking, trying very hard to understand the context, and even in terms of the sounds you make, to understand the context of the past. I think in some ways it goes overboard because we can never know what Mozart had in mind completely, but it's not as if singing technique changed so completely from 1770 to 2020. Beautiful singing, cantabile singing, is beautiful singing, it seems to me.
Mm-hmm.
And singing, especially singing, seems to have been passed down, at least in Italy, for the style seems to have been taught and continues to be taught pretty traditionally, and with a real line of provenance in some ways. Is that true or not? I mean, for as a violinist, all of our teachers take great pride in being able to point back to our or some of the great violin teachers of the past, Isai or someone, and can point back to Brahms and can point beyond back to Beethoven, and pianists can go back to Beethoven through Czerny and other teachers. How about singers? I would imagine that the singing tradition, the teaching, has a kind of tradition and provenance as well.
That's absolutely true. I mean, honestly, and it has to do just simply with, we don't change our spaces of resonance over generations. And so essentially it is, while each instrument, vocal instrument, is different because we are all different, but the ways in which we are you know able to project sounds, like, that doesn't change, right? And so over, certainly with this kind of music, which is acoustic through and
And we're
through.
talking Western tradition, I have to admit. I mean, there's
It
other
is
vocal
true.
traditions that go back thousands of years, but
It's
we're
true.
talking specifically. Yeah.
It is true, but at the same time, before the invention of the microphone, there is a certain amount of resonance that needed to be afforded to every singing tradition across the board.
Mm-hmm.
We're talking around the earth, these sort of properties of how to sort of, like, raising the soft palate gives you more space to allow you to project your sound. And this is
Mm.
not something that is actually different throughout different cultures. I think
Wow.
where the big change actually happened was the sort of revolution of the microphone and amplification. And that's when you get really different sounds coming and able to be shared.
Mm-hmm.
But if you're talking about being able to project over an orchestra or any kind of ensemble, be it Western, Eastern, anywhere, that it really would have to do with the properties of resonance and projection and breath control and all of that. So I always think I know we're getting into, it's interesting that we're getting into
No,
vocal.
this is what we want to talk about. Yeah.
Yeah, but I always think that, as a teacher, I could teach, my job is to teach technique, and then style and musicality and phrasing. But technique is technique, right? And so I could teach any style that is sort of put in front of me if you want to learn how to do a certain thing. But back to Mozart and Mahler. Yeah.
Sure. Well, because that fits right into, okay, you're singing the Mozart,
Yeah.
And you say that it resonates with Mahler because Mahler asks for similar things. How does Mahler ask for similar things to the Mozart? And then please go into the differences. Yeah,
Yeah.
let me put it into context. The last movement of the symphony, which was written as a song earlier on in several years earlier, and a collection of songs in a collection. And he continued to be obsessed with this song for a while. His third symphony resonates with the ideas, and indeed, he was going to incorporate the actual song of a child's vision of paradise into his third symphony. It didn't quite work out, and then he was going to, and then it found its way in as the seed of the fourth symphony, the first three movements based on aspects of this song. And then he orchestrated the song as a symphonic movement in for the finale of this fourth symphony. So that's the context, and here's the song now. Please speak to that. How it's Mozart, how it's not Mozart.
Yeah. So the text and the music, the song that you're talking about, comes from a collection called Das Knabenwunderhorn, which is essentially songs for children. And not all of the songs in that collection speak. I mean, they some of them speak to very difficult topics. However, during that time, I would say that the mortality rate was very different. People were in touch with difficult subjects in a way that perhaps sometimes I think maybe we aren't so close to. Um, but this piece in particular is has all sorts of imagery, really vivid imagery of a child's vision of what heaven would look like. So it's the divine banquet, and all of the comings and goings of the people, Saint Luke and Peter and Saint Martha. They all have their roles, and they're fulfilling all of these things to sort of create the banquet and to create this kind of amazing spread of beauty and food. And one can just imagine that perhaps it was through the eyes of a child that maybe never had enough to eat, or
Right.
perhaps, I mean, just the way we might imagine, just, someday I'm going to have this. And
Yes.
that's sort of how I think about it when it comes to this text. Um, in terms of the stylistic, well, you're right. I mean, Mahler was thinking that it could actually be sung by a boy. So I think that it is a boy soprano. And so I think that he's asking for a certain purity of tone, a certain childlike awe, and a sense of wonder. And uh, at the same time, that voice needs to be able to project over an orchestra that is Mahlerian in size. I mean, it's not as big as orchestra by any means, but still, So it's there's that sort of push and pull that I always feel with this piece, of I know that a more sort of, I guess, womanly sound is going to project beautifully, and then trying to kind of finesse that with this childlike grace and wonder is always at the forefront of my mind with this piece.
Uh, Leonard Bernstein recorded it two ways, or
Mhm.
maybe three ways, or five ways. I don't know. I only know of two. One was with a boy soprano, and it was an interesting experiment. But when
Yeah,
you hear it, it's too hard for a young child to sing.
yeah,
At least, and this was one of the great children singers, I believe, from probably from like the Vienna's boys choir or something like that. I mean, a really expert young singer, and God bless him, but he doesn't. It's too messy.
yeah,
It's not it's not a soul of a child. It's a real child singing,
yeah,
and he doesn't have the kind of technique yet. He has the purity of sound, certainly in a boyish way, and it's beautiful in its way. But it definitely, I can understand why Mahler performed it with a female singer. I mean, a soprano, a professional singer. I don't think he ever performed it with a child, even if he had that idea in mind. I think he made his decision that that's not really going to work. And I don't think it works, although some people will argue with me. I don't think it works in Bernstein's, who was a brilliant Mahler. I mean, he identified, I think he thought he might even be the reincarnation of Gustav Mahler. I mean, just he felt so close to Mahler. But I don't think that experiment worked really well. It's an interesting thing. You can find that on YouTube as well if you want to listen to it. But I did listen to it, and I just the poor child, and I shouldn't say the poor child. He's a brilliant kid, but he just can't make the turn of phrase. He cannot do the subtleties that are important. It's funny, but when the words about Saint Ursula laughing, the writing is so subtle, and the tradition of how a soprano, a female soprano, shall we say, actually sings the laugh, and it's not even a laugh. You have to intimate a laugh, but not do a laugh at that moment, right? You have, there might be a tiny portamento, just a little bit, but if you go that's affected, and he's demanding of the singer, of the soprano, not to be affected, no parody, nothing. He just wants a purity of sound to remind us of what an ideal child's, in a way, but it's the soul of a child. So that's a different aspect anyway, angelic in a way. That's a different sound than a real boy. And you should know, because you have a real boy, an 11-year-old boy, who I thought, maybe we'll put him out on stage and you can sing from backstage and he can just mouth the words. And I'm just kidding, but I just, yeah. So please continue. I'm sorry, I keep interrupting because you evoke these things in my head, memories of we've tried it as a boy soprano and it doesn't work. It really does. For me, it really needs the female soprano voice, the professional voice, to be able to make it through this song, because it's hard. It's long, too.
Yeah. I mean, I think that the tradition has often been that the female voice, or the soprano voice, stereotypically can be also seen as having those childlike qualities. I think because they sing in the same octave, and so in some ways I don't see it as a conflict. And you're absolutely right. I mean, it's just too tricky for a child to be able to manage any of that, and to have the sort of like nuance that that presenting beautiful poetry to an audience needs. I would say in this piece, it's in a way, it's like an art song nestled right in the middle, or right at the end of a symphony. And it's one, Mahler is special in that way. It's very rare that you have that happen. But he had a reverence for song. He had a reverence for poetry. And also this great mastery of orchestration. So he married these two things in a way that is that I'm not sure has been equaled. His Rückert-Lieder, or the Lieder eines fahrenden Gesellen, all of those are just they're just masterful creations. And this also, this fourth movement, it sits in that same place. Yeah.
I agree. I will just say a couple things about the rest of the symphony. The first movement, we hear either the jester's hat or the sleigh bells. That's the sound. Goethe, I believe, wrote the poem or the image of the jester in paradise and the fool's idea of paradise. And that's what inspired the actual song. Mahler makes it a child, a more innocent naivete, as opposed to one that is sort of an adult
No.
Yeah, it's a different, it's slightly different image. One is more innocent in some ways. One is more comical. One has more to do with the 15th century poetry and drama. The idea of the wise fool giving truth to something, but doing it in a way that is not confrontational and can be it can be distanced. You can distance yourself from it and look at it and with a knowing smile, but also hear a bit of truth. So that's a different image, but it did inspire the sounds at the very beginning of the symphony, and the little grace notes that the flutes play, dia 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 dia, that go along with the sleigh bells. That's something that goes into the song, the first few notes that you actually sing. You have that again. It's at a slower pace, but you have that kind of grace, that half step figure, dia dia dia, that kind of thing that is from the actual vocal line that inspires the very beginning of the first movement. The genial quality and the joy that is evident immediately, with a little bit of Viennese panache, I guess, in the violin phrase. You have a sense of moving forward, of walking into and being in a place that is fun, congenial, and welcoming. Second movement is a danse macabre. It is based on possibly a picture of the violinist of death whispering into an artist's ear. That is something that goes back again to medieval times, and you can see it in early wood cuttings of artists and such. And I think of Saint-Saëns' Danse Macabre, where he retunes the violin to give us an otherworldly and kind of grotesque sound. Mahler uses this also in his second movement, which is the dance of death in some ways, enticing, inviting, but always with that sense of a little bit of sense of danger and otherworldliness. And Mahler is always on the verge of grotesquerie in his symphonies. It's confrontational to the audience. I think it probably turned them off a great deal, but it is very 19th century. You're right about the 19th century being obsessed with death in some ways, or having a lot of it. There was enormous amounts of child mortality. I am reminded of, and this is a little bit off the beaten path here. I'm just going to go there for a second. I cannot help but remember visiting a place in Iowa where Dvorak summered. Or had a summer vacation when he was in the United States, and he played every day at the local church. He played the organ for mass, and I went to that church, of course, make a pilgrimage, and in the graveyard around there were just hundreds of little gravestones of children that had passed. And it reminded me that at the turn of the century, child mortality was huge, not only in the United States but around all around. Mahler himself, I think, one of 9 children, but I don't think all of them survived. So he must have experienced his siblings' death. That must have affected him. And then later on, of course, the death of his own children must have, at least his one child, affected him terrifically later on. At this point, he is not married. He has not even met his beautiful wife to be. So this is before that. But as you said, it was the Knaben, the book of the children's songs.
Wow.
He has an interest in children. He's taking his own experience, I'm sure, and his interactions with his own siblings and maybe his own observations. But moving that into the second movement, I sort of understand why that would be an interesting look. Of course, the connection to the last movement, there are thematic connections in terms of the melodies, picking up some of the aspects of the melody of the song and putting that into the second movement. And then the third movement, which is sort of in some ways the heart of the piece. It is, as he said, based on Saint Ursula's smile. Again, he's looking back to medieval depictions on tombs of knights and saints with that slight smile of being in paradise, of being at peace. And he has that in mind for the calmness and beauty of the third movement, even though there are moments of extreme grief. And others also say that he mentioned the memory of his mother's forgiving smile, even at times of extreme stress. And we know that she was an abused mother. The father was quite abusive to her. And so we know all this because of Mahler's interactions with Freud at a time of trouble in his marriage. He went to Freud to work things out. And so a lot of Freud reported on this anonymously, but we knew it was Mahler. And it's fascinating to know that we know so much about the inner workings of Mahler's psyche, and also his own statements in writing these symphonies, that he really is working out some things inside as well. That is what is so interesting, I think, about Mahler, is that we know so much about his thoughts, his feelings, and in ways that we never encounter in other composers. We can only suppose. So the context is modern in that we know his inner feelings. We see all of this working out with the crazy wildness of today's pop stars and their dramas that are being played out in front of us all the time. And we expect to hear about people's love affairs in the songs that they write these days. And so it's interesting that we know so much about Mahler's music through what he revealed and what others revealed about his own psyche at different points in his life. I think the volume of writings about Mahler just is overwhelming. And I would say, as a conductor, I have never written more things into my score than into the scores of Mahler. And what's so fascinating is that he himself wrote so much into his scores to tell you not to rush, to pull this line, to make sure you're not, or to rush forward. I mean, everything that he knew an orchestra might make a mistake about, or a conductor might make a mistake in terms of interpreting his music, he wrote in to help, and also to make sure that his intention was absolutely clear. And I'm wondering if he wrote the same kinds of things into the songs that he wrote. I mean, certainly in the fourth movement, he tells you no parody. This has to have purity of sound. But what about some of his other songs?
No, that's absolutely true. He's very specific, and absolute and descriptive in his. It's not actually typical, the sort of typical. Sometimes it is, of course, with the Italian markings that you get in scores. Those are sometimes across the board, but they are descriptive in a beautiful way. So it's not always just piano here. It's more about a color, or a way that you could imagine, like you said, no parody, no. With some kind of a descriptive adjective for how he wishes the text to be delivered, or the harmonic language or sound landscape that's underneath as either a different character or part of the psychology of what's going on. Even if we didn't have so much written about and writings of Mahler, some of this would be really clear, just given how beautifully expressive his music is altogether. I mean, you're absolutely right. The difference between the second and the fourth movement, it's like two sides of the same coin. And so it's you get to see this wonder, which also, I always think that, like, we love the sweetness of the fourth movement because we've been through the rest of it.
Correct.
So that
yes.
contrast, that contrast shows up in, and it makes it more a deeper emotional impact because of it.
Absolutely. Isn't it interesting that it was not embraced by early audiences? And even while he conducted it, where I'm sure he was insisting on, probably one of the best performances would have been one that he would give because he was such an expert conductor,
Yeah.
and just a superb, one of the great musicians of all time, no question, in terms of technique and ability, his ear open to every pitch, every sound, every color. But that audiences didn't, and I think it is perhaps because of, you do go through so much in the first three movements, and then you are confronted with something that seems so simple. I mean, it's just,
Absolutely.
it must have been different. It's not the choral finale, and also his second and third symphonies are so darn monumental. And the fourth symphony is so much more like a chamber work. It still calls for a big orchestra, but a more Brahmsian orchestra, as opposed to these mammoth orchestras where you have 8 to 10 horns and just everything. Where you're, eventually he has an anvil where someone strikes it with a giant hammer. It's like a Wagner opera on the stage.
Throw everything
So
in there.
yeah, I just, everything is, why not the world? As he said, the symphony must be like the world. It must embrace everything. I said that to Sibelius. But here it's more intimate, and yet the conceit of the whole thing is heavenly. I mean, that is otherworldly. It's even greater than man's experience, human's experience, I should say. And at the end, I wonder, is it all a dream? Is this some kind of Freudian dream at the end? And I just only ask that because of its context in the time that it was written, when these things were being formulated and were at top of mind in terms of philosophers and theoreticians and even scientists, discovering the brain, and the possibilities of artistic expression being really going out on edges, starting at the very end of the 19th century. The Verismo style of opera, everything was just getting extreme and human, superhuman, super emotional, and giving great weight and importance to emotions and expressions of the inner mind, of the inner world of man. For better or worse, the grotesqueries and the flights of fancy and the exaltations. Everything was, all up there. Everything was heightened, I guess. So at the very end, is it that the music is so beautiful that you can't imagine it, and therefore the symphony itself just goes off into the ether, goes, we are left in heaven? Or is it indeed maybe I don't know if it's a more cynical view, but that this has all been a dream, that this is the concept, this is Mahler's dream that he's sharing with us? I don't know. What do you think? I'm just curious.
Um, I think it could be that
Could
it's
be both, of course.
a dream. I sort of like to think that we write what and we perform what we need, and
That's true.
that perhaps this was a needed element for him in his life, and whatever it was needed to come out of him, and in a way we can make of it what we wish. But I know that I need I need this point of view, and it's whether it's steeped in reality or not. In some ways, it doesn't matter because it helps me it helps me to work through in the way that music is sort of my church. It's my way of touching the divine. I find that this kind of music it fulfills me and my soul, and I just hope that it does the same for an audience.
I'm sure I know it will because I've seen it in action already. I know. I know.
Yeah.
That's why I was so excited that you accepted our invitation to join us for our concert and we get to hear you in Mozart and Mahler, which is so exciting. Two brilliant composers who wrote for the voice at the pinnacle. And one at the beginning of his journey. I don't know, when you're halfway through your life at 16. I mean,
Yeah.
I know he didn't think that, and no one was thinking that at the time. And he was precocious, no question about it. But it's truly at the beginning of a career. And Mahler writing after great success. This very more intimate in some ways, but also very ambitious symphony in terms of what it's trying to grasp and express. We're so excited to have you with us on this journey. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you. This has been such a pleasure. It is so much fun to speak with you like this.
Thank you.